The stylus scratches against wax in the dim morning light, each letter carved with the careful precision of a man who has written too many of these documents. The commandant pauses, rolls his shoulders, and dips the bronze tip again. Outside, the Rhine flows past the fortress walls, carrying news and rumors downstream toward distant cities that feel more like memories than destinations. I am your DrowZy historian, and this morning we follow the final hours of a Centurion whose name appears on discharge papers that still smell of fresh beeswax. 25 years of service ending with the scratch of metal on yellow tablets, witnessed by men who will forget his face before the next watch change. The fort has been his world, but today that world grows smaller with each completed line of text. The commandant's office sits in the heart of the Principia, stone walls thick enough to muffle the sounds of morning drill from the courtyard beyond. Oil lamps flicker in their bronze holders, casting shadows that dance across scrolls and tablets stacked on wooden shelves. Maps of the Rhine frontier hang from iron hooks, their edges curled from years of consultation during border disputes that now seem routine as sunrise. The commandant himself bears the weathered look of a career officer, his vine staff leaning against the desk within easy reach, though today it serves more as furniture than symbol of authority. Our Centurion stands at attention, but his posture carries the subtle ease of a man whose military bearing has become second nature rather than conscious effort. His scarred hands rest at his sides, fingers that have gripped gladius hilts and javelin shafts now empty of weapons. The bronze fittings on his belt catch the lamplight, polished from decades of use, but beginning to show the green patina that speaks of age and weather. His eyes move occasionally to the window opening that frames a slice of the Rhine, where merchant boats drift past like distant thoughts of civilian life. The discharge document grows longer with each careful stroke. Military service record, conduct assessments, final pay calculations, citizenship confirmations. The language follows imperial formulas developed over generations, yet each word carries the weight of a particular life, ending one chapter and beginning another. The commandant works methodically, occasionally consulting wooden tablets that contain service records dating back to the Centurion's arrival as a young recruit from Trier, eager for adventure and steady pay in an empire that seemed eternal as stone. What news from Trier has reached the fort during these final months of service? Letters arrive sporadically from the civilian world, carried by merchants and official couriers who pause at the fortress before continuing downstream. The Centurion has received word that his father died 3 winters past, that his sister married a pottery merchant, that the old neighborhood near the amphitheater has expanded with new shops and workshops. But letters capture only fragments, like trying to understand a conversation by hearing every 5th word. The city he left behind has continued its daily business of birth and death, profit and loss, celebration and mourning, while he maintained watch over a stretch of river that marks the edge of Roman order. The commandant finishes the main text and begins the witness section, where other officers will add their names and seals to verify the document's authenticity. These bronze diplomas serve as proof of service and citizenship, documents that former soldiers carry like talismans through a civilian world that sometimes views veterans with suspicion. The metal will outlast parchment and papyrus, surviving rain and rough handling during long journeys home to places that exist more in memory than current reality. Morning light strengthens through the window, illuminating dust motes that drift like tiny spirits through the office air. The fortress awakens around them with the familiar sounds of military routine, hobnailed sandals on stone, the clatter of equipment being prepared for daily inspection, voices calling orders in the crisp Latin of professional soldiers. These sounds have provided the rhythm of the Centurion's adult life, marking time more reliably than sundials or water clocks. Soon they will become memories, replaced by the different music of civilian mornings in a city where merchants haggle over wine prices and children chase hoops through narrow streets. The commandant signs his name with a flourish that suggests years of practice, then reaches for the small bronze seal that will make the document official. The impression leaves a clear mark in the warm wax, an image of imperial eagles that represents authority stretching from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to the Danube. This small symbol carries the weight of an empire that has shaped the world through engineering, law, and the steady presence of men like our Centurion, who spent their youth maintaining the borders that allow civilization to flourish in the spaces between. The completed discharge papers rest on the desk like a bridge between two lives. Behind them lie 25 years of frontier service, seasons of patrol duty and garrison maintenance, friendships formed and lost, enemies faced and defeated, letters written home to people who aged, while the writer remained frozen in their memories as a young man seeking fortune beyond familiar horizons. Ahead lies uncertainty disguised as homecoming, the challenge of fitting a soldier's skills and temperament into a civilian world that has continued evolving without him. The courtyard of the Principiar fills with morning activity, as word spreads that discharge ceremonies will take place before the noon meal. Other soldiers gather to witness the formal reading, partly from courtesy and partly from curiosity about their own eventual departures from military service. Some face years more of frontier duty, others count months or seasons before their own discharge papers receive the commandant's careful attention. They watch the proceedings with the mixed emotions of men who understand both the anticipation and anxiety that accompany such transitions. Bronze military diplomas follow standardized formats developed by imperial bureaucrats who never served on frontier posts, yet the words carry genuine weight when spoken aloud in morning sunlight. The commandant's voice carries clearly across the courtyard as he reads the official language that transforms a soldier into a veteran, a man bound by military oath into a citizen free to choose his own path. The phrases sound ancient even when newly written, drawing on legal traditions that predate the current emperor and will likely survive his successors. Our Centurion listens to his own life summarized in official terms: service record without major disciplinary action, completion of required years, fitness for civilian life, entitlement to land grants and tax benefits available to honorably discharged veterans. The words feel both accurate and inadequate, capturing the administrative facts while missing the daily reality of winter watches on river walls, summer campaigns against restless tribes, years of small decisions that shaped character more thoroughly than any formal training program. The bronze diploma itself gleams in the morning light, its surface inscribed with text that will remain legible long after the men who witnessed its presentation have returned to dust. These documents sometimes surface decades later in archaeological excavations, discovered in the ruins of houses where veterans spent their civilian years, tangible connections to individual lives within the vast machinery of imperial administration. Future scholars will study them for insights into military organization and citizenship policies, but today the bronze represents simpler things: proof of service, promise of benefits, permission to leave. How much of his savings survived the camp's wine merchants and dice games? Military pay arrives regularly but disappears with equal reliability into the small pleasures and necessities that make frontier life bearable. Soldiers develop relationships with traders who follow the legions, offering goods unavailable through official supply channels. Better wine than the standard ration, clothing more comfortable than military issue, small luxuries that provide comfort during long watches and longer winters. The Centurion has been more careful than most, setting aside coins when possible, but 25 years of small expenditures accumulate like sediment in a slow river. The Treasury building squats near the Principiar like a stone toad, its thick walls and narrow windows designed to discourage unauthorized interest in its contents. Inside, clerks maintain records with the obsessive precision of men whose careers depend on accurate accounting. Every payment, every deduction, every fee appears in careful columns that tell the financial story of military life. The Centurion's account shows the steady accumulation of pay over decades, reduced by regular expenses and occasional indulgences, leaving a sum modest by civilian standards, but substantial enough to support careful living during the transition to new circumstances. The Treasury clerk counts coins with practiced efficiency, separating silver from copper, checking weights and purity with the suspicious eye of a man who has encountered too many attempts at fraud. Military pay comes in various forms: basic salary, bonus payments for successful campaigns, special allowances for frontier service, occasional gifts from grateful commanders. The coins tell their own stories through mint marks and imperial portraits, representing different emperors and economic policies that shaped the Centurion's career. Some bear the image of rulers who died before he completed his service, making the money itself a form of historical record. Leather pouches receive the counted coins with soft rustling sounds that represent years of accumulated wealth. The Centurion hefts each bag, feeling the weight of metal that will support his civilian life until other sources of income can be established. Veterans often invest in small businesses or agricultural properties, using their military experience to organize enterprises that benefit from disciplined management and reliable work habits. Others find employment with wealthy civilians who value the organizational skills and loyalty that military service develops in suitable candidates. Will his family recognize the man who left as a young recruit? 25 years change faces and bodies in ways that letters cannot convey. The smooth-cheeked youth who departed Trier with dreams of glory and steady pay has become a weathered man with scars earned through frontier service and eyes that have seen enough violence to appreciate peace. His sister's children, born during his absence, know him only through stories and occasional gifts sent from the frontier. His mother, if still alive, has aged from the middle-aged woman who wept at his departure into an elderly stranger who may see her son's face in his features, but struggle to reconcile memory with present reality. The Centurion's quarters occupy a small room in the officers' section of the barracks, larger than spaces assigned to common soldiers but still Spartan by civilian standards. A narrow bed with straw mattress and wool blankets, a wooden chest for personal belongings, a shelf for equipment and documents, a small table and stool for writing letters and maintaining records. The walls bear no decoration beyond functional hooks for hanging gear and clothing. This space has been home for the final years of his service, yet it contains surprisingly few items that speak of individual personality or preference. Military equipment covers the bed in neat arrangements that reflect decades of inspection preparation. Bronze-bossed helmet with horsehair crest, segmented armor plates connected by leather hinges, gladius in its decorated scabbard, dagger for close work, military belt with its array of bronze fittings, cloak pin bearing the unit's insignia. Each piece shows signs of regular maintenance and careful use. The patina and wear patterns that develop when quality equipment receives proper attention over extended periods. Some items he will keep as mementos or for practical use during civilian life. Others will remain with the unit for assignment to his replacement. Personal belongings fill a smaller space but carry greater emotional weight. Letters from family members, tied with cord and stored in a wooden box that also contains small gifts and mementos from his service years. A bronze mirror polished smooth that has reflected his face through the gradual changes of military life. dice made from bone worn smooth by countless games during off-duty hours, a small bronze lamp in the shape of a dolphin, purchased from a Greek trader who claimed it brought good fortune to travelers. These objects lack monetary value but represent the accumulation of experience and memory that transforms military service from mere employment into a defining chapter of life. The wooden chest itself tells stories through its construction and decoration. Built by a Germanic craftsman whose work found markets throughout the frontier region, it bears carved designs that blend Roman and tribal motifs in patterns that speak of cultural exchange along the empire's edges. The Centurion purchased it early in his career, when the novelty of military life still overshadowed its routine hardships. Over the years, it has held his possessions through multiple postings and transfers, becoming as familiar as an old friend and nearly as reliable. Clothing presents practical decisions about civilian life in a world where military uniforms mark their wearers as either active soldiers or obvious veterans. The Centurion owns several tunics suitable for civilian wear, though their quality and cut reflect military preferences for durability over fashion. A heavy woolen cloak will serve well for travel, especially during the autumn journey that lies ahead. Leather sandals, reinforced for long marching, will carry him home along roads built by legions like his own, maintained by soldiers who understood that empire depends as much on transportation as conquest. How has his hometown changed during his quarter-century absence? Trier began as a tribal settlement before Roman engineers recognized its strategic value as a river crossing and administrative center. During the Centurion's military service, the city has grown steadily, attracting merchants, craftsmen, and administrators who serve the Rhine frontier's complex needs. New buildings rise on foundations that follow Roman architectural principles, while older structures adapt to changing uses and expanding population. The amphitheater where he watched gladiatorial games as a youth may now host different entertainments, reflecting evolving tastes and available performers. The neighborhood where his family lived has likely experienced the gradual transformation that affects successful provincial cities. Wooden buildings give way to stone construction as prosperity increases and fire safety improves. Streets receive paving stones that make transportation easier during wet seasons. Public fountains appear where private wells once served individual households. Markets expand to accommodate growing trade volumes, while workshops multiply to serve increasing demand for manufactured goods. These changes represent progress and prosperity, yet they also mean that the physical landscape of memory may no longer match current reality. The main gate of the fortress stands open in the morning light, its massive wooden doors reinforced with iron fittings that could withstand siege engines if circumstances required such defense. Guard posts flank the entrance, though today they serve more ceremonial than practical functions. The road beyond stretches toward distant horizons, its paved surface marked by milestone stones that measure distance in Roman miles toward cities whose names evoke memories of campaigns, postings, and peaceful interludes during a career that spanned multiple provinces and commanders. What stories will the road reveal about the empire's changing fortunes? The great highways carry more than travelers and trade goods. They transport news, rumors, and the subtle signs of imperial health or decline. Milestone inscriptions bear the names of emperors who commissioned their construction or repair, creating historical records that trace political changes across decades. The condition of bridges, way stations, and road surfaces itself tells stories about administrative efficiency and available resources. Merchant traffic levels reflect economic conditions in distant regions, while the presence or absence of military patrols suggests the current state of frontier security. The Centurion adjusts his traveling pack and takes his first steps as a civilian, leaving behind the fortress that has been home for years. His hobnailed sandals ring against stone pavement with sounds that will soon fade into memory, replaced by the different rhythms of civilian footsteps on roads that led toward uncertainty disguised as homecoming. Behind him, the fortress continues its daily routines under new command, while ahead lies a journey that will test whether 25 years of military service have prepared him for the different challenges of civilian life in a world that has continued changing during his absence. The Rhine flows past the fortress walls, carrying its ancient burden of silt and secrets toward the sea. Merchant boats drift downstream like moving fragments of the larger world, their cargoes and passengers representing the complex web of trade and communication that connects frontier posts to distant capitals. The river has witnessed the passage of armies and emperors, the rise and fall of tribal confederations, the gradual extension of Roman influence into regions that once seemed as remote as the moon. Today it witnesses one more small transition, as a career soldier begins the journey home to discover what home has become. The bronze discharge certificate grows warm against his chest as morning sun strikes the first milestone beyond the fortress gates. Carved numerals catch light like small promises. Augusta Treve Rum 47 miles. The stone stands exactly where military engineers positioned it decades ago, its measurements verified by surveyors who understood that precision in distance meant predictability in supply lines, troop movements, the careful choreography of empire. But for a civilian walker, these carved numbers represent something different entirely. 47 miles becomes a question of days rather than forced marches. Without the rhythm of military columns, without the predetermined stops of army logistics, distant stretches and contracts according to weather, conversation, the simple luxury of choosing when to rest. His leather boots, worn smooth by parade grounds and garrison duties, must learn the different cadence of roads traveled for personal reasons rather than imperial necessity. The paving stones beneath his feet tell their own story of engineering ambition, each block fitted with the kind of attention that Roman road crews brought to projects meant to last centuries. The drainage channels run true, carrying away the night's rain towards streams that feed the Rhine. Wild grasses grow in the joints between stones, softening the harsh geometry of conquest with the patient persistence of local vegetation. This road has carried legions toward Germania, Germanic tribes toward Roman courts, merchants and pilgrims and runaway slaves, each group leaving invisible traces in the accumulated wear of constant passage. Mathematics becomes a different discipline when applied to civilian travel. Military calculations assumed specific daily distances, predetermined rest stops, the reliable logistics of way stations stocked for army units, but a single traveler moves according to different equations. Weather matters more when you lack the collective warmth of tent mates. Hunger arrives on its own schedule rather than at appointed meal times. The body's rhythms, so long subordinated to military discipline, begin asserting preferences that have been dormant for 25 years. He counts his steps for the first mile, a habit from route marches where precision mattered for tactical planning, then lets the counting fade as civilian walking reveals its own patterns. The road curves to follow natural contours rather than the aggressive straight lines of military engineering. Here the builders chose efficiency over demonstration, working with the landscape rather than imposing abstract geometry upon it. The result feels more conversational, as if the road acknowledges the hills and valleys it passes through rather than simply conquering them. A merchant's cart appears ahead, its wooden wheels raising small clouds of dust that settle slowly in the still air. The sound reaches him first, the creak of axles, the steady clop of oxen hooves, the rattle of goods secured with rope and optimism. He hasn't heard civilian transport in years without the background noise of military camps, and the simple domesticity of it strikes him as unexpectedly musical. The cart's owner walks beside his oxen, guiding them with quiet words and gentle touches rather than the harsh commands that move military supply wagons. His clothes show the practical elegance of successful trade, well-made but unpretentious, chosen for durability rather than display. When he notices the approaching traveler, his greeting carries the careful friendliness of someone accustomed to meeting strangers on lonely roads. "Good morning, friend, traveling far today?" The question requires translation from military to civilian thinking. In the army, destinations were assigned and distances predetermined. Now he must calculate not just where he's going, but how far he wants to walk before evening, which depends on weather, the condition of his feet, the availability of lodging, factors that were once handled by logistics officers and supply sergeants. Toward Augusta Trevero Rum, he answers, testing how it feels to name his destination as a personal choice rather than a military assignment. "Though I'm learning civilian pace." The merchant nods with understanding that suggests long experience reading fellow travelers. First time walking these roads without army business. The question reveals how obviously his military background shows, despite the civilian clothes and carefully folded discharge papers. Perhaps it's the way he scans the surrounding countryside, noting sight lines and defensive positions out of professional habit, or the straightness of his posture, maintained by decades of drill sergeants who accepted no compromise with proper bearing, or simply the quality of alertness that comes from years of guard duty and patrol work. 25 years of service, he admits, still adjusting to choosing my own stopping places. The merchant's expression shifts to something approaching reverence. "Quarter-century man, you've earned your papers, then that's proper service." He gestures toward his cart. "I carry goods between Rhine posts and the interior, always grateful for the roads you soldiers keep safe." They fall into step together, the ox cart setting a pace that allows for conversation without breathlessness. The merchant's goods reveal themselves gradually through gaps in the canvas covering, amphorae that probably contain wine or oil, wooden boxes bound with bronze fittings, rolls of fabric that catch light with the subtle richness of quality dyes. This is trade on a human scale, personal relationships built over years of regular routes, trust established through repeated honest dealing. "News from the provinces?" the veteran asks, realizing how isolated garrison life had become. Military dispatches carried tactical information and administrative orders, but little of the civilian news that shapes daily life for most citizens. The merchant's face brightens with the pleasure of someone who collects information as carefully as he collects goods. "Currency's been stable this year, praise the gods. New silver issues from the mint at Lugdunham, good weight and purity. Makes trading easier when everyone trusts the coins." He adjusts his grip on the ox goad, settling into the rhythm of a practiced storyteller. Grain prices held steady through the harvest season, though there's talk of transport difficulties from Egypt. "Nothing serious yet, but worth watching." These details sketch the outline of an empire that continues functioning, while individual soldiers serve their tours and return to civilian life. Markets operate, currencies maintain value, goods flow along established routes. The great machine of Roman commerce adapts to local disruptions and seasonal variations, its fundamental mechanisms robust enough to absorb the kind of small shocks that would devastate simpler economies. "What about building work?" the veteran asks, thinking of the skills that might translate from military engineering to civilian construction. "Much demand for experienced hands." "Always," the merchant's answer comes quickly, suggesting this is familiar territory. Good stone workers stay busy, especially those who understand Roman construction methods. The The cities keep growing and proper building requires proper knowledge. He glances sideways with the assessing look of someone accustomed to evaluating potential business partners. Military engineers learn quality work. Civilian builders appreciate that. This conversation opens possibilities that hadn't existed in military life, where career paths followed predetermined channels and advancement came through established hierarchies. Civilian work means negotiating your own terms, establishing your own reputation, building relationships that depend on mutual benefit rather than military command structure. The prospect feels simultaneously liberating and daunting. The road begins a gentle descent toward a valley where smoke rises from what must be a way station. The merchant points toward the buildings with proprietary satisfaction. Good stopping place. Clean beds, honest prices, and the innkeeper keeps excellent records. Important for tax purposes, and the local magistrates appreciate proper documentation. As they approach the way station, the veteran realizes this will be his first night as a civilian traveler, his first time signing a guest register without military rank or official business to justify his presence. The building ahead represents a threshold between his military past and civilian future, a place where he must begin learning the social customs and practical requirements of life outside the army. The way station reveals itself as a well-maintained example of Roman roadside architecture. Stone foundations support timber walls, with a tile roof that speaks of permanent investment rather than temporary accommodation. The stable area shows signs of regular use: clean straw, proper drainage, feeding troughs carved from local stone. This is infrastructure built to last, designed by people who understand that reliable lodging makes trade possible and trade makes prosperity possible. Inside, oil lamps cast warm light over wooden tables where other travelers sit with the relaxed posture of people who have reached their destination for the day. The innkeeper, a woman whose competent manner suggests years of managing the complex logistics of hospitality, approaches with the kind of professional friendliness that puts nervous guests at ease while discouraging trouble from potentially difficult ones. Welcome, travelers, rooms for the night. The merchant handles his arrangements with the practiced efficiency of someone who stays here regularly. The veteran waits his turn, studying the guest register that lies open on a wooden stand near the entrance. Names written in various hands, some in the confident script of educated merchants, others in the careful letters of people for whom writing remains a special skill. Dates, destinations, occasionally a brief note about weather or road conditions. When his turn comes, the innkeeper's manner shifts slightly as she takes in details that mark him as recently discharged military. Not unfriendly, but more attentive, perhaps recognizing that veteran travelers often carry interesting stories along with their discharge papers. First time staying with us, she asks, preparing to write his information in the register. First time staying anywhere as a civilian, he admits, then realizes how that sounds. 25 years of army service, still learning civilian customs. Her expression warms with genuine interest rather than mere politeness. Congratulations on completing your service, that's proper dedication. She turns the register toward him, offering a stylus. If you'd like to sign for yourself, most guests appreciate the personal touch. The bronze stylus feels strange in his hand after years of writing primarily military reports and routine correspondence. His name looks different written in a civilian context, without rank or unit designation, simply his personal identity recorded for the practical purposes of innkeeping and local administration. Below his signature, he writes Augusta Trevero Rum as his destination, making it official in this small way. The room she shows him is simple but well appointed, a proper bed with clean linens, a wash basin with fresh water, a small table where he can set his belongings. A window looks out over the valley where the road continues its journey toward distant destinations. The space feels enormous after years of shared military quarters, luxuriously private and quiet. Settling his pack in the corner, he realizes this is the first room he has occupied as its sole occupant since before his enlistment. The silence has a different quality than the enforced quiet of guard duty or the exhausted stillness of soldiers sleeping after long marches. This is the peaceful silence of personal space, of time that belongs entirely to him, of choices that require no consultation with superior officers or consideration of unit needs. The evening meal in the common room introduces him to the social rhythms of civilian travel. Conversations flow around shared tables, creating temporary communities of strangers brought together by the practical necessities of the road. A wool trader discusses seasonal patterns with a pottery merchant. A government courier shares carefully edited news from the capital. An elderly woman traveling to visit grandchildren describes changes in her hometown's market day customs. He listens more than he speaks, learning the conversational patterns of civilian life. Military discussions focused on tactical problems, equipment maintenance, personnel issues. These conversations range more widely, touching on family matters, business concerns, local politics, the small observations that make up daily life for people whose primary concerns lie outside military service. The next morning brings the sound of his own footsteps on stone, unaccompanied by the familiar rhythm of column marching. The road continues its patient descent toward the river valley, where a ferry crossing will carry him closer to Augusta Trevorrow. Mist rises from the water ahead, softening the landscape into something that looks more like a painting than a tactical map. At the ferry landing, civilian commerce reveals its own complexities. The ferryman quotes prices that must be negotiated rather than simply paid according to military transport agreements. Other passengers discuss shared costs for larger cargo, the kind of informal cooperation that makes small-scale trade possible. A farmer transporting pottery to market explains the seasonal variations in river levels, how spring floods and summer droughts affect crossing schedules and cargo capacity. The veteran finds himself calculating costs with new attention to personal economy. Military service provided regular pay, predictable expenses, housing and food handled by army logistics. Civilian travel means managing his own budget, making decisions about where to spend money and where to economize, balancing comfort against the need to make his discharge savings last until he establishes new sources of income. The ferry itself is a study in practical engineering adapted to local conditions. Wooden platforms secured with rope and bronze fittings, guided by long poles that the ferryman uses with the skill of long experience. The crossing takes time, allowing passengers to observe the river traffic that represents another aspect of civilian commerce. Fishing boats returning from morning work, cargo vessels carrying goods between riverside communities, the occasional official transport that moves with the purposeful efficiency of government business. On the far bank, the road enters wine country, where terraced vineyards climb hillsides in patterns that speak of generations of careful cultivation. The landscape here shows the Roman genius for agricultural improvement, turning steep slopes into productive farmland through engineering that works with natural drainage patterns rather than fighting them. An older man working among the vines straightens as the veteran passes, offering the kind of greeting that country people give to travelers, friendly but not intrusive, acknowledging shared humanity without assuming unwanted familiarity. "Good morning, friend. Fine day for walking." "Indeed it is," the veteran agrees, pausing to rest his pack and observe the vineyard work. Beautiful country here. I've been working these slopes 40 years, the vine keeper says with quiet pride. My father before me, his father before him. Romans taught us proper terracing, proper pruning, made the difference between surviving and prospering. The conversation that follows reveals the deep satisfaction of work that follows natural rhythms rather than military schedules. The vine keeper explains how seasonal tasks create their own calendar. Pruning in winter, planting in spring, harvesting in autumn, each activity timed to work with weather patterns and plant growth rather than against them. His hands show the permanent stains of grape juice and soil, marks of honest labor that produces something useful and beautiful. Military service, the vine keeper asks, noting details that mark the veteran's background. At 25 years, just discharged, walking home to Augusta Trevero Rum. A long service, you'll find civilian time moves differently, not better or worse, just different, takes some adjusting. This simple observation carries unexpected weight. Military time was measured in watches, drill periods, campaign seasons, the artificial divisions that make army life predictable and controllable. Civilian time follows older rhythms, sunrise and sunset, market days and festivals, the agricultural calendar that connects human activity to natural cycles. Learning to live by these rhythms after decades of military scheduling represents another aspect of the transition from soldier to citizen. The vine keeper offers a drink of water from his jug, cool and flavored with the faint mineral taste of local springs. They stand together in comfortable silence, looking out over the valley where the road continues its ancient purpose of connecting communities separated by distance, but united by shared participation in the larger world of Roman civilization. What skills do you carry from army life? The vine keeper asks with the practical interest of someone always alert to useful knowledge. Engineering mostly. Bridge building, road maintenance, fortification work, stone cutting, timber framing, the mathematics of construction. Valuable skills always work for good builders, especially those who understand Roman methods. The vine keeper nods toward his terraced slopes. This kind of work requires proper engineering, drainage, stone placement, understanding how water moves through soil. Military engineers learn these things. The conversation opens another window into civilian possibilities. The skills that maintained army camps and built military infrastructure translate directly to the civilian projects that expand cities, improve farms, create the physical foundation of prosperity. The veteran begins to see how his military experience might become the basis for civilian success, not just through the savings and land grants that reward military service, but through the practical knowledge that 25 years of engineering work have provided. As the day advances, the road carries him deeper into country that shows the accumulated prosperity of successful Roman settlement. Well-maintained farms occupy the better soil, their boundaries marked by stone walls that speak of permanent investment rather than temporary occupation. Villages cluster around crossroads and river fords, their markets and workshops creating the economic networks that make rural life sustainable and profitable. The discharge papers in his pack represent more than the end of military service. They document his qualification for full participation in this civilian world, his right to own property, engage in trade, marry and raise children as a Roman citizen rather than as a soldier whose primary loyalty belongs to the legions. The transformation from miles to civis involves more than changing clothes and learning civilian customs. It requires rebuilding his entire sense of identity around personal choices rather than military orders, individual responsibility rather than unit loyalty. The complex freedoms and obligations of citizenship in a world where success depends on personal initiative rather than military rank. The sun reaches its zenith as he crests a hill that offers his first clear view of the Moselle Valley stretching toward Augusta Treverorum. The river winds through cultivated fields and established settlements, its waters reflecting the sky like a ribbon of light connecting the landscape to the larger world of Roman commerce and culture. Somewhere ahead, still days of walking distant, lies the city that represents home, family, the civilian life that awaits his return. But the journey itself has become more than simple transportation from military post to civilian destination. Each mile reveals new aspects of the world he is joining. Each conversation teaches new lessons about the skills and attitudes that civilian success requires. The road that carries him toward Augusta Treverorum also carries him toward a future that will be shaped by choices he has yet to learn how to make, in a world that has continued changing during his 25 years of military service. The afternoon stretches ahead with the promise of more discoveries, more conversations, more opportunities to practice the civilian arts of negotiation, relationship building, and personal decision-making that will determine whether his transition from soldier to citizen succeeds or fails. His footsteps continue their steady rhythm on stones laid by engineers who understood that roads serve purposes beyond mere transportation, connecting not just places but possibilities, not just destinations but different ways of being human in a world large enough to contain both military necessity and civilian dreams. The first drops arrive without warning, fat and warm against the wool of his cloak. Marcus pulls the fabric closer around his shoulders and feels something shift in the gesture, not the automatic adjustment of military equipment, but the comfortable settling of civilian clothing chosen for protection rather than regulation. The rain begins in earnest now, drumming against the stone road with the kind of persistence that suggests an afternoon's commitment to wetness. A roadside shrine offers shelter beneath its modest overhang, and Marcus finds himself considering options that would never have existed during active service. He could wait here until the shower passes, watching water pool in the carved dedication to Mercury while his cloak dries. He could push forward through the weather, accepting dampness as the price of progress, or he could seek more substantial shelter in the settlement visible through the rain-hazed distance, where smoke rises from workshops and the warm glow of oil lamps suggests human comfort. The luxury of choice settles over him like the wool itself, heavy, unfamiliar, oddly warming. For 25 years, where there had been something to endure or exploit tactically, never simply something to experience as a traveler with time enough to make personal decisions based on personal comfort. He adjusts his pack and steps back into the rain, but slowly now, feeling each drop as a small lesson in civilian priorities. The settlement reveals itself gradually through the shifting curtain of precipitation. Workshops line the main thoroughfare, their doorways glowing with the particular warmth of craftsmen's fires. The rhythmic hammering of metal on metal punctuates the rain's steady percussion, while the sweet smoke of burning cherry wood suggests a carpenter's plane shaving curls from seasoned timber. These are the sounds of civilian productivity, each workshop contributing its particular note to a symphony of useful creation that continues regardless of military campaigns or imperial politics. Marcus pauses beneath the extended eaves of a cobbler's workshop, drawn by the familiar scent of leather and the careful precision of skilled hands shaping raw material into something both beautiful and practical. The craftsman works with the kind of focused attention that Marcus remembers from his father's workshop, where every cut of the awl and every stitch of the needle served purposes that extended beyond immediate function into the realm of pride, tradition, and the quiet satisfaction of work done properly. The cobbler glances up from his last, nodding acknowledgement to the rain-dampened traveler without interrupting the rhythm of his work. His fingers move with the confidence that comes from decades of practice, shaping leather around the wooden form with movements so automatic they seem like breathing. The workshop walls display his completed works: sandals for summer walking, boots for winter travel, the occasional military caliga with its distinctive hobnailed sole, designed for long marches over difficult terrain. Marcus watches the craftsman's hands and remembers his own father's workshop, where similar tools had shaped different materials toward different purposes. The smell of leather mingles with memories of sawdust and glue, the particular combination of scents that had marked his childhood before military service had carried him away from such domestic concerns. Now, standing in doorways like this one, he begins to understand how civilian skills accumulate over lifetimes of careful attention to detail, how mastery emerges from the daily repetition of useful tasks, rather than the dramatic intensity of military action. The rain continues its patient work on the stones outside, and Marcus finds himself calculating not tactical advantages or strategic necessities, but simple questions of personal comfort and reasonable timing. When might the weather clear? How long would it take to reach the next substantial shelter? Does he have enough oil in his lamp to write by if evening arrives before he finds proper lodging? These civilian considerations require different kinds of thinking than military planning, more personal and immediate, less concerned with coordinating multiple units toward strategic objectives than with managing individual resources toward individual goals. The cobbler's apprentice arrives with leather freshly tanned, the hide still bearing the subtle patterns that speak of careful preparation. Master and student exchange few words, but their coordination suggests years of shared work, the kind of partnership that develops when people spend their days solving practical problems together rather than preparing for theoretical conflicts. Marcus observes this civilian version of military teamwork and recognizes both similarities and crucial differences in how people organize their efforts when the stakes involve craftsmanship rather than survival. As the rain begins to lighten, Marcus steps back into the street with a nod of thanks to the cobbler, who returns the gesture without breaking the rhythm of his work. The wet stones reflect the warm light from workshop doorways, creating patterns of illumination that shift and dance as clouds move across the afternoon sky. The settlement continues its productive hum around him, each craftsman contributing to the larger enterprise of civilian life with the same dedication that soldiers bring to military objectives, but directed toward creation rather than destruction, toward building up rather than breaking down. The road beyond the settlement climbs toward higher ground, where the massive stone arches of an aqueduct span the valley like a giant's bridge. Marcus has seen such engineering marvels throughout the empire, but approaching this one as a civilian rather than a soldier allows him to appreciate aspects of Roman construction that military urgency had never permitted him to consider. The precision of the stonework speaks to planning that extends beyond immediate tactical needs, toward the kind of long-term thinking that builds infrastructure for generations rather than campaigns. Water flows steadily through the covered channel atop the arches, carrying mountain streams toward cities and settlements with the reliability that makes civilian life possible. The engineering required to maintain such consistent grades over miles of varying terrain represents a different kind of military thinking than Marcus has practiced. Not the rapid adaptation to changing battlefield conditions, but the patient calculation of permanent solutions to enduring problems. The aqueduct will carry water long after current military campaigns have ended, long after present political arrangements have shifted, long after individual soldiers and administrators have completed their service and returned to civilian concerns. Standing beneath the arches, Marcus considers the relationship between military service and civilian infrastructure. His years of frontier duty have contributed to the security that makes such construction projects possible, but the aqueduct itself serves purposes that extend far beyond military necessity. The water flowing overhead will support workshops like the cobblers, provide for families and businesses, enable the kind of settled civilian life that gives meaning to military protection. The permanent nature of such engineering contrasts sharply with the temporary arrangements of military camps, designed for mobility rather than permanence, for tactical advantage rather than long-term civilian benefit. The afternoon light filtering through the stone arches creates patterns that shift slowly as the sun moves across the sky. Marcus finds himself calculating not tactical positions or defensive advantages, but simply the beauty of light and shadow, the way Roman engineering creates spaces that serve both practical and aesthetic purposes. The aqueduct functions as transportation infrastructure, but it also marks the landscape with human intention, declaring Roman presence through the quiet authority of useful construction rather than the dramatic display of military force. A merchant's wagon passes beneath the arches, its wheels creating familiar sounds against the stone road. The driver nods to Marcus with the casual acknowledgement that travelers offer each other, a civilian gesture that assumes shared purposes rather than potential conflict. The wagon's cargo, amphorae of oil, bundles of wool cloth, wooden crates marked with traders' symbols, represents the kind of peaceful commerce that military security makes possible, but that operates according to entirely different principles than military logistics. As evening approaches, Marcus reaches a way station where travelers can find basic accommodation for the night. The building serves civilians rather than military personnel, offering simple rooms and common meals for those whose journeys operate on commercial rather than strategic schedules. He arranges for lodging with the kind of negotiation that requires civilian skills, personal persuasion rather than military authority, individual payment rather than imperial requisition, courtesy rather than command. His room contains basic furniture arranged for civilian comfort rather than military efficiency. A small table provides space for personal belongings, while an oil lamp offers light sufficient for reading or writing. Marcus arranges his possessions with habits learned through decades of military service, but the context transforms familiar actions into something approaching domestic routine. His discharge papers rest beside his wax tablet, official documents now serving personal rather than military purposes, legal proof of civilian status rather than evidence of military obligation. The lamp's steady flame illuminates the blank surface of the wax tablet, waiting for whatever thoughts the evening might bring. Marcus has maintained records throughout his military service, tracking everything from supply inventories to personnel changes with the precision that military administration requires. Now, writing becomes a personal choice rather than a professional duty, a way of processing civilian experiences rather than documenting military activities. He begins with practical entries, expenses for food and lodging, distances traveled, observations about road conditions. But the familiar act of recording information gradually opens space for different kinds of reflection. The civilian conversations of recent days have introduced concepts that military training never addressed. The long-term planning required for civilian success, the importance of personal relationships in commercial arrangements, the way individual choices accumulate over years to create civilian identity. The wax accepts his stylus marks with the same responsiveness it has always shown, but the content emerging beneath his hand explores territory that military record-keeping never mapped. How does a soldier learn to think like a citizen? what civilian skills can be built from military experience, and which require entirely new kinds of learning. How does individual decision-making differ from following orders? And what responsibilities come with the freedom to choose personal directions rather than accepting assigned missions? Outside his window, the way station settles into evening routines. Travelers share meals and exchange information about road conditions, weather prospects, commercial opportunities in various cities. These civilian conversations operate according to different principles than military briefings, more personal, less hierarchical, focused on individual success rather than unit objectives. Marcus listens to the murmur of voices and begins to understand how civilian society organizes information sharing, how people build the relationships that support long-term civilian goals. The lamp flame flickers slightly as evening breezes move through the building, but its light remains steady enough for writing. Marcus continues his entries, documenting not just the day's events but his growing understanding of civilian priorities and methods. The process of writing helps him organize thoughts that have remained scattered throughout the day, transforming individual observations into patterns that might guide future decisions. Morning arrives with the sound of horses being prepared for departure. Through his window, Marcus observes the organized activity of an imperial post station, where official messengers exchange mounts and continue their rapid journeys carrying administrative communications across the empire. The efficiency of the operation impresses him with its precision, fresh horses ready at exact intervals, riders maintaining schedules that coordinate with similar stations throughout the road network, messages traveling at speeds that make imperial administration possible across vast distances. The postal system represents a different aspect of Roman organization than Marcus has experienced directly during his military service, where military communications focus on tactical immediacy and strategic coordination. The imperial post serves the broader administrative needs that keep civilian society functioning. Tax records, legal decisions, commercial regulations, census information, all the detailed documentation that enables civilian life moves through networks like this one, carried by riders whose dedication to schedule matches any military courier's commitment to mission completion. Marcus watches the morning's departures with professional appreciation for the logistics involved. Maintaining such precise timing across hundreds of miles requires the same kind of planning and coordination that military campaigns demand, but directed towards civilian administration rather than military objectives. The post riders disappear into the morning mist with messages that will influence civilian lives in ways both immediate and long-term, carrying decisions that affect everything from local tax assessments to imperial policy changes. The contrast between the postal system's speed and his own leisurely civilian pace strikes him as he prepares for another day of walking. Military urgency has trained him to move quickly when circumstances require it, but civilian travel allows for different rhythms, different priorities. He can stop to observe craftsmen at work, engage in conversations that serve no tactical purpose, take shelter from weather simply for personal comfort rather than strategic necessity. His discharge papers rest securely in his pack, but their significance continues to evolve with each civilian experience. Initially, they had served as proof of completed military obligation, legal documentation of his right to civilian status. Now they begin to represent something more complex, evidence of military experience that might translate into civilian advantages, credentials that demonstrate reliability and competence to potential employers or business partners, a history that connects his past service to future civilian possibilities. The road ahead stretches toward Augusta Treverorum, with its promise of family reunions and civilian challenges. Each mile brings new opportunities to practice civilian skills, to observe how people organize their lives around personal goals rather than military objectives, to understand the different kinds of thinking that civilian success requires. The distance remaining represents not just geographic space to be covered, but time for continued learning about the civilian world he is joining, preparation for decisions that will shape his post-military life in ways he is only beginning to understand. The hills above Augusta Treverorum hold their familiar shape against the afternoon sky, but the smoke rising from the city carries unfamiliar scents: workshops burning different woods, kilns firing pottery with techniques that have changed in 25 years. Marcus adjusts his travel pack and studies the distant red-tiled roofs, counting the buildings he remembers and noting the new construction that has spread beyond the old boundaries. His discharge papers rest against his chest, their bronze seal catching the light as he shifts position on the rocky outcrop where he has chosen to pause before the final descent. The city walls follow the same line they held when he left as a young recruit, but additional towers punctuate their length now, and the gates show signs of recent reinforcement. Smoke from countless hearths and workshops creates a hazy canopy over the settlement, evidence of prosperity and population growth that speaks to successful decades of peace and commerce. The river curves through the valley exactly as he remembers, but new docks extend into the water, and structures that might be warehouses or granaries cluster near the waterfront in configurations that puzzle him. He can identify the Forum complex by its distinctive roofline, the basilica still dominating the central district with its impressive proportions. The amphitheater sits in its expected location on the eastern slope, though additional seating appears to have been added to its upper tiers. These landmarks anchor his memory, providing reference points that confirm he has indeed reached his destination, but the spaces between them hold mysteries: new streets, expanded residential quarters, commercial districts that have grown beyond the boundaries he carried in his mind through all those years of foreign service. The discharge papers seem heavier as he contemplates this moment of return. They represent his legal right to be here, his documented transition from military to civilian status, but they cannot address the more complex questions of belonging that arise as he studies this changed cityscape. 25 years of military service have given him skills and experiences that may or may not translate into civilian success. The city below offers opportunities, but also challenges that his training has not prepared him to navigate. A merchant's cart moves along the road below, its driver calling greetings to pedestrians in accents that sound both familiar and strange. The language remains recognizably the local dialect, but pronunciation has shifted in subtle ways, and phrases reach his ears that incorporate new vocabulary, borrowed words that reflect trade relationships and cultural influences that have developed during his absence. Even the rhythm of daily life appears different. People move with the confidence of a settled, prosperous community, rather than the cautious efficiency he remembers from his youth. The afternoon light slants across the valley, highlighting details that both comfort and unsettle him. Gardens extend beyond the residential areas in patterns that suggest systematic urban planning, evidence of administrative competence and civic investment. The roads show recent maintenance, their surfaces smooth and well-drained. These signs of municipal success create optimism about the opportunities that await him, but they also emphasize how much has changed, how many adaptations civilian life will require. His reflection on the hilltop extends longer than strictly necessary, but the moment feels significant enough to deserve careful attention. Below lies the beginning of his post-military life, relationships and responsibilities that will reshape his daily routines and long-term goals. The discharge papers provide legal documentation of his eligibility for this transition, but the actual work of becoming a civilian again will require skills and insights that military service has not directly provided. The descent toward the city gates takes him through suburban settlements that have grown up along the main approach road. Small workshops and modest residences cluster around crossroads, creating communities that serve both the city's needs and the requirements of rural districts beyond. Children play in the spaces between buildings, their games and laughter creating a domestic atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the military environments that have shaped his recent years. Women tend gardens and manage household tasks with the unhurried competence of people whose daily schedules follow personal and family priorities rather than military timetables. The main gate of Augusta Treve Rorum rises ahead, its massive stonework impressive even by military standards. Guards in civilian dress examine documents and question travelers with the professional courtesy of men who take their responsibilities seriously but do not expect serious trouble. Their equipment appears well maintained, their demeanor alert but relaxed, evidence of a community that maintains security without living in constant expectation of conflict. The guard who approaches him wears the expression of someone performing routine duties. His examination of the discharge papers proceeds methodically, his questions polite but thorough. Where has Marcus traveled from? What business brings him to the city? Does he plan extended residence or brief visit? The bronze seal and official language of the documents clearly impress him, but his follow-up questions reveal that military discharge papers represent unusual documentation, worthy of respect but requiring explanation. The conversation develops slowly, punctuated by the guard's consultations with his colleagues and careful rereading of particular passages in the discharge documents. Marcus finds himself explaining military terminology, describing the units in which he served, providing context that helps civilian authorities understand the significance of his documentation. The process takes longer than he anticipated, but the guard's diligence reassures him about the city's administrative competence. Other travelers wait behind him, their patience suggesting that thorough document examination represents standard procedure rather than unusual suspicion. A merchant with a cart full of pottery discusses tax obligations with another guard. A family group presents what appear to be travel permits for examination. The gate serves as more than a simple entrance. It functions as an administrative checkpoint where the city manages the flow of people and goods, maintaining records that support both security and commercial regulation. Eventually, the guards return his papers with expressions of respect and curiosity. One asks whether he plans to seek employment in the city, mentioning that experienced men with military backgrounds often find opportunities in construction projects or security positions. Another inquires about his family connections, explaining that residential registration requires sponsor information or property documentation. Their questions reveal bureaucratic procedures that military life has not prepared him to navigate, civilian requirements that will demand new kinds of planning and preparation. The streets beyond the gate carry him into neighborhoods that blend familiar and unfamiliar elements in ways that create constant recognition followed by confusion. The basic layout matches his memories, main thoroughfares connecting major districts, side streets providing access to residential areas, commercial zones clustered around transportation hubs. But the specific businesses have changed. The building facades show modifications and additions. The people moving through these spaces include faces he does not recognize, engaged in activities that follow patterns he does not immediately understand. A bakery occupies the corner where he remembers a metalworking shop. The building's basic structure remains the same, but the interior has been reconfigured to accommodate ovens and display areas, and the smells emerging from its doorway speak of different grains and baking techniques than those he associates with his youth. Customers enter and leave with the casual familiarity of regular patrons, their conversations touching on topics that reveal community concerns and interests that have developed during his absence. The residential quarter where his family lived spreads across several blocks of modest but well-maintained structures. Stone foundations support timber-framed upper stories, creating buildings that balance durability with affordability. Small gardens occupy the spaces between houses, evidence of residents who invest in long-term improvements to their properties. The streets show signs of regular maintenance, their drainage systems functioning effectively despite recent rain. He recognizes the general location of his family's workshop, but specific landmarks have changed enough to create uncertainty about exact addresses. A fountain that served as a neighborhood gathering place has been relocated or removed entirely. Trees that provided shade and orientation have grown larger or been replaced with different species. Even the street surfaces have been repaired and modified in ways that alter the visual cues he relied upon for navigation. People move through these neighborhoods with the purposeful efficiency of residents managing daily responsibilities. Women carry baskets of shopping, their routes suggesting familiarity with local merchants and market schedules. Men return from work with the tools and clothing that indicate various trades and occupations. Children play games that incorporate both traditional elements and innovations that reflect contemporary interests and available materials. The social atmosphere feels both welcoming and closed. Neighbors greet each other with warmth and familiarity, but their interactions do not naturally extend to include strangers. Marcus realizes that his reintegration into this community will require patience and social skills that military service has not directly developed. The hierarchies and communication patterns of civilian life operate according to different principles than those that governed his military experience. His family's workshop finally comes into view, its wooden door weathered but sturdy, the interior visible through windows that reveal familiar tools arranged in patterns that suggest continued operation. The building appears smaller than his memories suggested, but its basic character remains unchanged. A modest commercial establishment that combines residential and workshop functions, designed to support a family engaged in skilled craft production. Standing before this threshold, Marcus becomes acutely aware that the next few moments will reshape his understanding of home, family, and future possibilities. The discharge papers in his pack represent his legal right to civilian status, but they cannot predict the emotional and social complexities that await beyond this familiar door. 25 years of separation have created gaps in relationships and changes in family dynamics that will require careful navigation and patient rebuilding. The sounds emerging from the workshop suggest active work, the rhythm of hammering, the scrape of tools against materials, voices discussing technical details in the specialized vocabulary of craftsmen. These familiar sounds create both comfort and anxiety, evidence that his family's trade continues, but also proof that life has proceeded without him, developing patterns and relationships that may not easily accommodate his return. He adjusts his travel pack, feeling the weight of possessions accumulated during military service, items that represent his experiences and achievements but may have limited relevance to civilian life. The bronze seal of his discharge papers catches the afternoon light one final time before he steps forward to announce his presence, to begin the complex process of transforming from returning veteran to family member, from military professional to civilian participant in this community's daily life. The door opens before he can knock, revealing a face that combines familiar features with the changes that 25 years inevitably bring. Recognition dawns slowly, mutual and tentative, creating a moment of silence that acknowledges both connection and distance, both joy and uncertainty. The threshold between military and civilian life, between past and future, between memory and reality, dissolves as he steps forward into the warm interior light of home. The workshop's interior holds the particular warmth that comes from years of consistent use: wood shavings underfoot, the sweet smell of beeswax polish, tools arranged with the careful precision that speaks of craftsmen who know their trade. His sister's hands, though lined now with decades of detailed work, move with the same deliberate grace he remembers from their shared childhood. She gestures toward a bench worn smooth by countless hours of sitting, and he settles there as naturally as if 25 years had been 25 days. The conversation begins with the careful courtesy of near strangers, each testing the boundaries of what can be assumed, what must be explained. His nephew, a man now with calloused hands and the confident bearing of someone who has inherited both skill and responsibility, brings wine diluted in the civilian manner, weaker than the vinegary stuff that sustained the legions but somehow more satisfying. They speak of weather, of trade conditions, of the small civic improvements that have transformed Trier's appearance during his absence. The bridge across the Moselle has been rebuilt with better drainage. The market square now boasts a fountain fed by the same aqueduct that once seemed impossibly grand to his boyhood imagination. Gradually the conversation deepens. His sister mentions neighbors who have died, children who have grown and married and moved to distant cities, businesses that have failed or flourished according to the mysterious rhythms of civilian fortune. She speaks carefully around the obvious questions: why he never married, whether his military service brought wealth or merely survival, what plans he might have for the years remaining to him. He recognizes her tact as a form of kindness, allowing him to reveal as much or as little as comfort permits. The evening meal arrives without ceremony: bread still warm from the bakery, cheese from farms in the valley, vegetables preserved in the Roman manner that turns autumn's abundance into winter's sustenance. His sister's daughter, married now with children of her own, joins them at the table. She carries herself with the confident domesticity of someone who has never known uncertainty about her place in the world, never wondered whether tomorrow would bring battle or peaceful routine. Her children, his great-nephews, regard him with the frank curiosity that the young reserve for exotic visitors. As lamplight replaces the last natural illumination from the workshop's windows, he finds himself reaching for the wax tablet that has become his evening ritual. The motion draws attention, and his nephew asks about the military custom of record-keeping. This opens a conversation about army life that he can navigate more easily than personal questions. He describes the morning reports, the inventory systems, the careful documentation that kept 30,000 men fed, equipped, and moving in coordinated fashion across hundreds of miles of frontier territory. His great-nephew, perhaps 8 years old, asks whether soldiers really march 25 miles every day. The question brings a smile, the first genuine one since his arrival. He explains about standard marching pace, about the difference between campaign movement and garrison routine, about the way distance becomes less significant when measured in familiar daily increments rather than overwhelming totals. The boy's eyes widen at descriptions of camps that spring up each evening like temporary cities, complete with streets, defenses, and designated areas for every military function. But even as he speaks of army life, he notices how his voice automatically moderates to indoor levels, how his gestures become smaller and more contained in this domestic space. The workshop's ceiling seems lower than he remembers, though he knows it cannot have changed. His body, trained to expect the vast horizons of frontier posts, must readjust to walls and roofs, to the intimate scale of civilian architecture. the sound of neighbors' voices through thin walls, the clatter of cooking pots from adjacent buildings, the evening bells from Trier's churches, all create a density of human presence that both comforts and overwhelms after years of military isolation. His sister produces a small wooden box, worn smooth with handling, and from it draws items that survived his departure and the intervening decades. A bronze fibula he wore as a young man, its pin still functional though the decorative enamel has faded. A small clay oil lamp, cracked but still usable, that belonged to their father. A wooden stylus, its point blunted by years of writing on wax tablets much like the one he carries now. These objects bridge the gap between past and present, proof that some connections survive even the longest separations. The conversation turns to practical matters as the evening deepens. His sister and nephew have maintained the family workshop, but they could use additional hands for the larger commissions that come from Trier's growing population of merchants and minor officials. His military experience with leather work, the constant repair and maintenance that kept equipment functional in harsh conditions, translates readily to civilian craftsmanship. The precision required for military harness work exceeds what most civilian customers expect, making him potentially valuable despite his long absence from the trade. They discuss sleeping arrangements with the careful diplomacy of people who want to offer hospitality without presuming permanence. A small room above the workshop, previously used for storage, could serve as temporary quarters. It has a narrow window that faces east, toward the mountains he crossed during his final approach to the city. The morning light would wake him naturally, a gentle transition from the bugle calls that regulated military time to the church bells that mark civilian hours. As the household prepares for sleep, he steps outside into the workshop's small courtyard. The night air carries sounds he had forgotten, the distant murmur of the Moselle flowing past the city walls, the call of night birds that nest in civilian roof trees, the soft conversations of neighbors enjoying the evening coolness. Above, stars shine with the same patterns he memorized during countless nights of frontier guard duty, but here they compete with the warm glow from shuttered windows, the evidence of families settling into domestic routines. He removes his military cloak pin, the bronze piece that has marked his status for 25 years, and examines it in the lamplight spilling from the workshop door. Tomorrow, perhaps, he will find a place for it among the family's collection of meaningful objects. Tonight, it remains a tangible connection to the life he has left behind, a reminder that identity can shift gradually rather than all at once. The pin's weight in his palm feels both familiar and strange, like a word in a language he once spoke fluently, but now uses only in dreams. The wax tablet emerges from his pack one final time as a military tool. By lamplight, he records the day's expenses, the ferry crossing, the final night's lodging, the small purchases that marked his transition from traveler to resident. But the entries feel different now, less like official documentation and more like personal memory keeping. The stylus moves more slowly, forming letters with the care of someone who writes for himself rather than for military superiors who demand speed and efficiency. His final entry notes the condition of Trier's main road, the courtesy of the gate guards, the unchanged quality of Moselle Valley wine. But between these practical observations, he finds himself recording impressions that have no military relevance. The way afternoon light falls across his sister's workbench, the sound of children playing in streets that once knew his own footsteps, the particular comfort of sleeping under a roof maintained by family hands. These details serve no official purpose, but they mark the beginning of a different kind of record-keeping, the civilian practice of preserving memories for personal rather than administrative reasons. The small room above the workshop welcomes him with simplicity that feels luxurious after decades of military quarters. A wooden bed frame, stuffed mattress, a chest for belongings, a small table near the window. The walls show the careful attention of people who take pride in their surroundings, plaster smoothed and painted in warm earth tones, wooden joints fitted with precision that speaks of genuine craftsmanship. This is not the utilitarian efficiency of military construction, but the patient care that civilians invest in spaces meant to endure and comfort rather than merely function. He arranges his possessions with habits learned in countless temporary quarters, but the movements feel ceremonial now rather than practical. The bronze discharged diploma finds a place of honor on the small table, its legal language a bridge between his military past and civilian future. His travel pack, emptied of its contents, folds into a compact bundle that can rest forgotten in the corner until needed again. The transformation from traveler to resident requires no official ceremony, only the gradual relaxation of muscles trained to expect movement, the slow acceptance that tomorrow's destination is the same as today's location. The window's eastern exposure promises morning light that will wake him gently, without the harsh efficiency of military horns. He imagines the sun rising over mountains that he has crossed, illuminating valleys where he has walked, touching roads that have carried him from frontier service to family threshold. The journey's end creates space for the journey's beginning, the slow process of learning civilian rhythms, of rebuilding relationships interrupted by military necessity, of discovering what identity means when it no longer depends on rank and regulation. Outside, Trier settles into evening quiet. The workshops fall silent as craftsmen bank their fires and secure their tools. Families gather around hearths for the final conversations of the day. Night guards take their positions at the city gates, maintaining the security that allows civilians to sleep without concern for military threats. The sounds of peace, gentle, domestic, enduring, replace the sharp alertness that has governed his nights for 25 years. His discharge papers rest secure in their leather wrapping, legal proof of his right to civilian status. But the real discharge happens gradually, in moments like this, as military habits soften into civilian rhythms. The hypervigilance that kept him alive on hostile frontiers yields slowly to the trust that civilian life requires, trust in walls and roofs, in neighbors and night guards, in the assumption that morning will bring familiar faces rather than unknown dangers. The bed receives him with the particular comfort that comes from knowing tomorrow holds no forced march, no sudden alarm, no requirement to be anywhere other than here. His body, trained to wake at the first sound of disturbance, begins the slow process of learning to sleep deeply again. The soft sounds of family life, footsteps on wooden floors, quiet conversations through thin walls, the settling of timber as the day's heat dissipates, create a lullaby more effective than any military exhaustion. 25 years of service find their conclusion not in ceremony but in this simple permission to rest. The bronze diploma grants legal recognition of his civilian status, but sleep grants something more valuable, the gradual return of dreams untroubled by military necessity, the restoration of rest as comfort rather than mere recovery. In the darkness of a workshop room in Trier, with family voices murmuring through familiar walls and the Moselle flowing past city stones worn smooth by centuries of civilian footsteps, the long walk home finally ends in the profound luxury of peaceful sleep.